I can, yes.
Okay, so good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the School of Asian Studies. My name is Irina Tsarigarotseva, and I'm here to moderate today's online event. For several years, Dr. Igor Alexeyev and I have been translating the book of a prominent scholar and specialist in Islamic law, Professor Wael Hallaq. Eventually, last year, the Russian translation of Professor Hallaq's bestseller titled A History of Islamic Legal Theory, series, An Introduction to Sunni Usul al-Fiqh, has been published by the HCE Publishing House. The original book has been first published in 1997 and has since gone through several reprints. In the study, Professor Hallaq focuses on the early formation of the theory, analyzes its central themes, and examines the developments that gave rise to various legal doctrines in Sunni Islam. A great book which summarizes the Islamic jurisprudence, extremely well written, and essentially read according to some customer reviews on Amazon.com. We thought that the best way to present the book to Russian readers is to invite its author. So it is a great pleasure for us to introduce our speaker and special guest, Avalon Foundation professor in the humanities at the Columbia University in the city of New York, a leading world scholar in Islamic law and Islamic intellectual history. Our speaker is also an author of more than 60 books and academic papers in Islamic law, philosophy, and ethics. His books have been translated into many European languages: Arabic, Persian, Turkish, Hebrew, and now into Russian. Before I give the floor to him, let me kindly ask all the guests to turn off your microphones while the guest is speaking. The discussion will be open after finishing Professor Hallaq's speech. So ladies and gentlemen, please join me in welcoming Professor Wael Hallaq. Professor Hallaq, thank you for accepting our invitation. Please, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Irina. Thank you for the very kind words of introduction. I'm so happy to be talking to for me, unprecedented audience. This is the first time I have direct contact with what is a majority, if not all, Russian speakers. I am delighted to, of course, see the book translated, and I want to thank Irina and all the colleagues that she has mentioned who had anything to do with the translation and with introducing my work into Russian. I am, of course, humbled and grateful that this happened. And of course, thank you for Irina for the invitation and organizing this event. It is very good of you to undertake this this gathering, organization of this gathering. What I would like to do today is to stick by the framework of the field that the book has underlined. In other words, I would like to revisit the field of Usul al-Fiqh after, and this is a wonderful occasion for me to actually revisit my own work that I did something like about 30, 40 years ago. So to me, for those who follow my work, I have left that field in a sense. I've never really left it, but I have done other things, let's put it this way, over the past 30 years. So this was my first and pioneering work, the work that I started with my graduate and my early scholarly activities in the first about 15 years of my career. And then, of course, everything followed from there. Even my political works, as you will see in this lecture, connect back to Usul al-Fiqh. So actually, what I would like to do is look at Usul al-Fiqh now while trying to strike two birds with one stone. First, to frame the work itself, the book that was translated into Russian, but also take the implications of the field for our analysis of modernity today. In other words, I would like to use the field of usul al-fiqh, which happened to be established, as we all know, about 1300 years ago, 1200 years ago, as a critique of modernity itself, which is consistent with the entirety of the body of work I have done, especially in the past 15 years. So what is this field about? Most scholars and students, usually, including myself, we tend to think, when we think of usul al-fiqh, we tend to think of the components of usul al-fiqh, you know, the Quran, the Sunnah, and the modes of transmission, the science of language, legal language, logic, ta'lil, the accusation, etc., etc., etc. Which is perfectly fine. This is how we would understand the field. Without this, we cannot understand it. But the thing that we don't think about very much, and how we have not thought about very much since the field has been established as an analytical field in all of Western and Eastern academia, unless, you know, I'm missing, of course, something in Russian studies that I don't read Russian, so there may be the work may have been done there. So I don't know, but you tell me if I am missing something. I would love to know about it. What I would like to do now is to look at the meta narrative of usul al-fiqh. In other words, what is it? What is the whole science about? What is it about really at the end of the day? Not to think of it as a technical science, like how we derive general principles of jurisprudence, which really ultimately lead in a stage or two down the road, lead to reasoning about actual legal cases and deriving norms, etc., which is one of the functions of usul al-fiqh. This we all, I think, any specialist in usul al-fiqh knows this. But what is the narrative that engulfs and envelops usul al-fiqh, legal theory? And I would like to suggest that usually the meta narrative is, in fact, the narrative that, because it's meta, because it is hidden behind the scenes, it's the narrative that people tend to miss because it is not presented to them, let's say, through usul al-fiqh works. You have to go beyond these works in order to figure out what this meta narrative is. And in fact, the meta narrative is not only as important as the field itself. Without it, the field cannot be totally intelligible, totally comprehensible, totally understandable, and totally within the reach in terms of what its significance has for us. And so what I would like to suggest is this, is that the ontological and epistemological foundations of the field present us with the serious problems and issues as to how we see our own life in modernity as well. So there is something, in other words, heuristic about it. There is something that we can learn about this meta-narrative that affects the way we evaluate our own life in modernity. So the significance of the field is not just about Islam. It's not about the revival of so-called revival of the Sharia in the modern Muslim world. Actually, it goes even another stage, which is a stage that very few people have attended to, which is to ask the question, how does this field in its philosophical majesty? It is philosophically one of the most impressive intellectual systems anyone can lay. And I'm comparing it with the best of the Enlightenment production. I mean, comparing it with the Kantian philosophies, with Heidegger, with anything that you can invoke. This field philosophically is as respectable as anything you can come up with. And so we have to take it very seriously. But what does it attempt to do behind the scenes? What is there are a number of latent, silent, so to speak, assumptions behind usul al-fiqh that are not made explicit directly from usul al-fiqh works. In fact, they can be made explicit only through bringing together so many Islamic disciplines, including tafsir and the Quranic studies, because this seems to be, in fact, the initial key towards unraveling this meta-history, which is that at the end of the day, it's a simple story of creation that has magnificent ramifications in terms of what it means for people to have a law to govern their lives. The question is not about just as the modern state has made it, which is to say, the modern state is sovereign and therefore it legislates what it deems fit for public interest and so forth and so on. And that's the end of the story. And the rest is offshoots, and we analyze the offshoots. There's much more to this here than this narrative of the modern state. Here we have first we begin cosmologically. We begin to think about that actually at one point there was nothing, and then God created the world. But this little act of creating the world out of nothing, ex nihilo, is simple in terms of narrative, but extremely complicated in terms of what it signifies. When we say that God, and this is central, as everyone in this virtual room knows, it is very central that when God created the world, he did not create the world out of a cold impulse. He created the world with love, etc. But he created for the Sharia. For the Sufis, he created the world with love. But for the Shari'i people who determine what the legal system should be on what is, he created the world bil adli wal insaf. It's with justice, basically, to translate it roughly into English, because insaf and adl in Arabic are much more nuanced and complicated than the word justice, because the word justice today now is actually highly technical in many ways. It is not, for example, a spiritual word. We cannot accuse the word justice within the Western discussion of it for the past 200 years of being anywhere close to spirituality. The justice is highly secularized concept. But when we talk about adl and insaf, we are talking about basically ad-din wa dunya together. We are talking about everything in the world. There is nothing that escapes the al-adl wal-insaf, because nothing escapes God in his creation. When he designed the world, he designed it, in other words, with an ethical fabric. So this idea that he created the world as an ethical fabric is highly mysterious. It actually poses the most important problem ontologically for Muslims. The question is, what went into his mind to create this ethical world? Because this is precisely where the crux of the matter is. That's precisely, actually, too, if I may indulge your patience, it's precisely the difference between modern science and Islamic science. I mean not science, religious science. I'm talking about natural sciences like optics, for example, or medicine, or chemistry, or astronomy. All of these fields actually went back to the same question of foundations. In other words, the story of creation is when God created the world with justice. We want to know, they said, we want to know what kind of mind came up with this kind of design. Because if we can understand, at least we will never understand the mind of God, obviously, because this is a derivative. A fara' can never supersedes the asl, which modernity has forgotten. We are merely a fara'. We are a derivative of existence. There are millions of other species around us, and God created everything. And therefore, if we have even a concept of property, it is only metaphorical and derivative of the real mulk of the final malik, whose concept of ownership is the real one. That's the only real thing in the world. And the Sufis didn't miss that. That's why they call it Hallaq. This is the sense of reality. That is the truth is that the truth of ownership, the truth of mercy, of compassion, of love, of hate, of everything, actually originally is not within us. And so when we are derivatives, we cannot say that we understand the secrets of the universe, and therefore it is our challenge to figure out, and the Quran did not hide it at all. The challenge is to figure out what is really the concept of justice by which God created the world. Because if we can understand a part of it, it's just a small part of it, we might very well be able to imitate that concept of justice and recreate the justice on earth as God, or created on earth as God wanted it for us. Because if he built the world with justice, we need, as khalifas on earth, and this is again, the al-insan being a khalifa is the one thing that we can all take for granted. So we are actually the custodians of earth, of God on earth, and therefore our plan should be to emulate as much as possible the concept of justice with which God created the world. And this is the bottom line of the Sharia. The Sharia is not it's not the law of God on earth. That actually is a heresy if you analyze it very deeply. To say that the Sharia, as many Western scholars say, is the will of God on earth, it's a big heresy, because in fact it is only an ijtihadic, so to speak, enterprise. As we all know, it is only probable. It's our best guess at what it is, and it has no pretension of being the law. It is a representation, one of the representations of the law on earth. And so the idea to discover, to elaborate something, to live in a system of values, to discover, let's say, a set of mathematical or chemical or astronomical truths about the world, is nothing but trying to figure out the majesty of God's creation, the wisdom of this creation, so with the purpose of trying to also apply it to ourselves. Modern science thinks of this, for example, differently. Modern law, which is the same parallel and analog of modern science, it is highly instrumental. We assume that we know everything, and if we don't know everything, we will know it in good time, and we will be able to recreate nature. Hence, cloning and not all sorts of other, major medical and scientific disasters we are being engaged with now, and which are leading to major trouble and problems. However much people are enthusiastically pro-scientific, I like the idea of the pro-science. Science must be situated in a proper philosophical context before it becomes science, which is lacking in modernity. There is no real philosophy behind the science here, meaning philosophy that foregrounds science in a larger context. Science is its own master. This was never the case in Islam. The same thing is with the law and the Sharia and the usul al-fiqh. The genetic and structural composition of the system allows us, actually, this is why I'm speaking, allows us to speak about the law and science with the same actually set of regulations and set of principles and set of analyses, because they operate from the same mind as we do this today. In modernity, you can talk about technology, and you can talk about bureaucracy and administration, you can talk about politics, you can talk about economy. But if you analyze all of them, you will realize that all of them share the same epistemological structure. It's simply this epistemological structure tends to specialize itself, so to speak, and go regulate something in chemistry or in engineering or in philosophy or in the science of law. But the mind behind it is the same mind. And so what we can say about this is that there is this idea there, but it invites the question of why do I have to even abide or think about this in these terms? Because this is the biggest question, is whether whether there is rational choice in religion or not. When I choose to be, let's say, a religious person, or when a Muslim says, I am a Muslim, is this just an act of blind faith? Or is there something, if we look at the tradition as a complex intellectual tradition, there is something much deeper than just simply an act of blind faith? Because this is what the secular modernity likes to think about religious people, is that they are fanatical. So they become like, well, maybe some people are, they believe but when you think about the system as a system of an intellectual system of major proportions that created a genre that extended over hundreds of years, inviting to participate in it in terms of producing ideas and books about it, the best of Muslim minds. Remember one thing, we can always say there were million muhaddiths, million Quran commentators. There are many people who specialize in many fields. Usul al-fiqh is one of those fields that is highly selective. Selective in the sense that if you are not a supreme mind, you can never contribute to usul al-fiqh in any creative and original way. So this is why you see that in terms of quantity, in terms of number of books, you will see that actually usul al-fiqh has quantitatively the smallest number of production of books in Islamic history. If you talk about fiqh, I don't know how many fiqh works we have in manuscripts and published and everything together. I would venture to say in the thousands at least, if not hundreds of thousands of commentaries, if not even, I might even be surprised. I might not be surprised if you tell me there are actually, between commentaries and everything on the shuruh and the mutun, etc. of the fiqh, there are millions probably. But usul al-fiqh, I will wager that it is not more than a few hundred works that can be said to be conducive to the flourishing and the continued blood flow of the discipline itself, that made it alive and vibrant intellectually. And so, with the question is, with all of these brilliant minds working on usul al-fiqh, they just go decide, oh well, we are going to be believing in this narrative of creation, of the God's majesty, His brilliance, etc. It presupposes something which you cannot take for granted. Why do I did? From the earliest of times, there were zanadiqa in Islam. In other words, atheists who basically were as vehement atheists as we have today. But they did not flourish generally as much as the believers, so to speak, flourished. And the question becomes, is that did these people like Fakhruddin al-Razi, it is difficult to miss Fakhruddin al-Razi as an example of one usul author. It's difficult to miss his stupendous brilliance. I mean, the man had a mind that will compete with any mind I have ever seen in the entire history of humanity. We are talking about the top of the top of the top of human minds produced in the world, in world history, not only in Islam. So I have to ask a question, well, with all of his knowledge and brilliance, why would he choose to go for this narrative and not to become, let's say, an atheist or a secularist, which is, of course, not an individual decision. I'm aware of the fact that secularism is not really, at the end of the day, is a movement that the Enlightenment created out of a multiplicity of factors that led to oceanic change. So secularism is not the choice of individuals. Secularism is the history of Europe. Europe created secularism. And so it is, I'm aware of this fact, but I would still say, considering that Muslims entertained and hosted so many different minds who thought about so many things, from the radical Abu Nuwas in sexuality to the major atheists, Zanadiqa, and whatnot, and of course the Muslims who came in different colors, whether they were Sufis or Adibs or Shari'i people or whatnot. I mean, it's like an endless variety of. And so the question is, what makes somebody to opt for a recognition of God as a matter of personal, as a matter of rational choice? How does rational choice, in other words, how does rational choice lead for some people necessarily to the recognition of God as the supreme master and the creator of the world? And therefore, from that little fact, being creator of the world, flows a whole chain of paradigms that basically end up regulating the entirety of the social order. So it becomes a matter of living by the principle of, and this was seen most acutely, in my opinion. It is very articulated so blatantly, if I may use the term, in Sufism more than any other place, but everyone else accepted these presumptions. The Sufis only brought it to the surface. The Sufis created out of a very complex phenomenon a simple narrative that will illustrate, that's one of the beautiful things about Sufism, is that it can range from the most complex forms of thinking to actually the simplest narratives of quotations and little phrases that sum up so much. And there is this little story that is always striking, I found striking in the Sufi narrative, which of course the Shari'i people did not miss at all. It was an integral part of their way of thinking, which is that when God created an-nafs, meaning al-nafs al-insaniyya, when he created the human, he asked it, who is your Lord? And the nafs said, who is your Lord? Answering God. So God decided to relinquish it for 4,000 years in something called the Sea of Hunger. So basically, the way to teach this nafs that who is the Lord, who is the real Lord, is to make somebody starve. Starvation, therefore, as we know, anyone who knows the Sufi tradition in Islam and even the other pietistic movements within the Sharia, we know that hunger, coming from fasting, hunger and fasting and things to do with food is not a bodily physical thing. Actually, it is an epistemological act of first order. Hunger and fasting is not a physical thing. I mean, it is initially, but in a very primitive sense. Hunger is in fact, an epistemological fact of first order, because it is one of the chief ways to show the human that in fact he is or she is or they are a contingent entities in this world, that they need something around them to be able to. You cannot, if you deprive somebody of drink and water, they can survive basically without water for 3 days and that's it. Look at how fragile, how perishable, literally how perishable we are. We speak about an apple or about an orange that is perishable. We are actually as perishable. And therefore, this invites the question, what makes us then so fragile, so tentative, so contingent? And the answers to these questions led to the fact that there is something much bigger than us that we need to account for as a sacred entity. We come from a certain surrounding that nourishes us. When we say Mother Nature, it is understood in that tradition about 500 times with more intensity than what we mean it today. We say, oh, Mother Nature. Nowadays we say Mother Nature, and they said Mother Nature. But if you think about the difference between the two, it's a difference of quality, high difference, tremendous difference of quality. When said Mother Nature, it means that literally without mother, we are nothing. Today, we say Mother Nature, but actually we go and destroy the Mother Nature at the same time. We actually are engaged in by this logic, engaged in a family destruction. We are destroying our own family, our own habitat, the very environment that gives us life. And so the Usul al-Fiqh is there to remind, with its logic, that has, as I said, a silent part to it, which is the meta narrative of it, and the continuation of it, which is elaborated in the most sophisticated of ways. It reminds us, and I'm trying to just to finish, as I promise, as soon as possible. It comes to remind us that the idea of principle, the idea of first order principle or principles, is crucial to the flourishing of humanity. And this one might say, what do you mean by this? I mean, why should a principle be? I would argue that the loss that Muslims endured in the 19th and 20th century by wiping out Usul al-Fiqh from its paradigmatic status, because Usul al-Fiqh was at the foundation and the center of the law until the beginning of the 19th century. Now, losing Usul al-Fiqh is not just about losing the techniques of reasoning, as almost everybody thinks, that it's about really using the Quran and the Sunnah to reason about things, and through ta'leel, and come with what Ghazali called a thamara. This is only a small part of the loss. To me, this is not the greatest loss. The greatest loss is when Usul al-Fiqh basically became epistemologically defunct within the Muslim tradition. We lost also with it something very important. We lost our sense of the importance of the higher principles by which we must commit ourselves. Our highest principles today are really, in this liberal world now that everybody seems to be rushing to embrace, is basically ultimately the material wealth, money, and such things related to it, to power, this kind of earthly hedonistic power. These are the only principles that really govern our life today. And these shift according to our ways of living. One time we begin to define our economics one way, but ultimately the principles are materialistic, have nothing to do with the nourishing of the soul or anything that really commits society to a certain ethical order. This is why, for example, you see the rise of the perennial school, of the one that René Guénon was one of major architects of it, which continues now with the number of other, including Nasr, Sayyid Hussein Nasr, and what is this? What is this school? This school is really one of the modernity's reactions to this loss. It is basically saying that we cannot really live meaningfully, or even in a healthy and robustly healthy way, we cannot live meaningfully or in a healthy way without the set of higher principles that should always remain beyond our control. We can interpret them in many ways in order to accommodate our reality to them and them to our reality. But we must be bound by some higher ethical principle to which we can all appeal and which we all agree to accept as the final arbiter of. There is no such thing. And in the world of politics, even as we speak now, in what's going on in Gaza, as well as the politics of the world, this is precisely the best manifestation and the best show of the lack of any ethical framework that can restrain people. This is why Paul Kahn, the Yale fellow, in writing about, for example, the comparison between secularism and secular liberalism and religion, he says, well, no matter how violent religion used to be or was, it still committed people to some principles that nothing in secularism can commit. It is, of course, It was never ideal in history, but secularism is without any ethical boundaries, without any ethical basis. And so when we think about usul al-fiqh, and I want to finish here, I think we should be thinking about usul al-fiqh in its, of course, technical and important substantive contents, which the jurists showed us what they are, and we can analyze them to death. But at the same time, we need to be thinking about usul al-fiqh as a philosophical enterprise about how we live our life. We don't have to follow usul al-fiqh, and there are people who are not Muslim in this world, and therefore they have other choices to make. But the principles behind this, the heuristic, meaning the educational, pedagogical lessons that usul al-fiqh can teach us, are so valuable that we should consider it to be an integral part of the critique of modernity. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Professor Hallaq, for providing a broader context for today's presentation of the Russian translation of your book. It was actually my genuine desire to listen to this broader context, because I'm convinced that understanding of your book on Islamic legal theories should go with understanding your other prominent books. First of all, The Impossible State and some other books on Sharia. Actually, I have some of these books with me in English language and also in Russian translation. Thank you so much again. Actually, I had a question. You had frequently referred to we, and I had a clarifying question. Do you address to your Muslim audience, or do you genuinely believe that Islamic ethical system could be applied by other people? So, and I have mentioned that you have already replied to this question. Okay, thank you so much. And now I give the floor to Professor Sukiyanin, a research professor of the Faculty of Law, High School of Economics. Professor Sukiyanin, as I have already said, is a leading expert and specialist in Islamic law in Russia. And he, of course, he masters in all the languages which were involved in doing all this work on the Russian translation, English, Arabic, and Russian. And he is, of course, he is the best specialist and the best person to comment on the Russian translation. So, Professor Sukiyanin, thank you for coming, and the floor is yours, please.
Thank you, Rina. I would like to start with some formal and personal remarks. The first one is that I am very glad to see Wael Hallaq. I've got acquainted with him maybe 20, 25 years ago when we were taking part in some conferences on Islamic law, Joseph Schacht conference in the United States and Spain, maybe in Leiden. And so I'm very happy to see him and to welcome him. Unfortunately, we can't meet him in Russia just now, but it is not our fault and our reason. It is the objective circumstances we are living in just now. The second observation is concerning my English. I'm not sure it is good enough. I don't speak English every day. I don't read English sources daily. I don't write in English every day, but I'll try to express my ideas in English as good as I can. I don't think that it is a good time to go into details concerning the book of Wael, translated into Russian. To be brief, I would like to say that his book, I'm sure, is a very wide step towards a proper and genuine understanding of usul al-fiqh. Yes, of course. There were a lot of books concerning the introduction to the theory of Islamic law. We can't miss the name of Joseph Schacht and others, Anderson and a lot of other persons. But of course, during the last 20 years, maybe more than 20 years, Wael is one of the leading, or maybe the leading scholar in Islamic law. It is a fact. I have no doubt about it. His book has a lot of very good sides, a very positive contribution into the understanding of Usul al-Fiqh. I would like maybe to mention the only one. In his book, Wael tried and succeeded in it to combine between the theory of emerging of Usul al-Fiqh, going through centuries to nowadays situation with the Usul al-Fiqh. It is very difficult to meet in one book the names of Ghazali, I mean Abu Hamid al-Ghazali, not Muhammad al-Ghazali, of course, as well as Abdul Wahab Khalaf, or Fasi, or Turabi. And of course, it is a very positive feature of this book to demonstrate Usul al-Fiqh as the developing theory through the centuries. Sometimes when we are discussing, when we discuss the Islamic sciences, Islamic heritage, and the many other fields of human activities, we stop ourselves at the beginning century of Islam, on the past, not present. And we are sure that it is enough to represent the Islamic science as a whole. It is not enough. The Islamic science is developing in every field, and of course, Usul al-Fiqh is one of these fields. And I believe that this book is very interesting and is a very good contribution to the study of Islamic law history, or to be more precisely, not Islamic law. I am a jurist, and I'm used to use the terms in proper sense. It is not Islamic law, it is fiqh, or usul al-fiqh. The jurists understand law in quite different way, of course. So I prefer to discuss the question of usul al-fiqh, or fiqh, or sharia, or some other notions connected with the Islamic science. I believe that this book is very important from other point of view. Islam is a very complicated and very contradictive phenomenon. On one hand, it is very simple. It was professed by ignorant people, by tribals. It is very simple to adopt Islam, quite another to say some words. Ashhadu Allah ilaha illallah. It is quite enough to become Muslim formally, to become Muslim. It is quite enough. But from the intellectual point of view, it is very complicated. On one hand, it is open book. On the other hand, it is closed book. Even for Muslims, it is closed book for Muslims. The great majority of Muslims, they don't know the intellectual heritage of Islam. They just take Islam as some ritual movements or sides of human life, not else. It is very important to mention this feature of Islam, especially today. How Islam is understood nowadays in our world. How do Muslims understood in nowadays? They are understood as some ignorant people who are not able to be developed, to be, they have, sometimes we hear sayings that Islam has no culture, absolutely. There are no culture. For example, after the events of 2001, some of the journalists say, yes, we just evaluate every culture, but not Islam, because it has no culture, absolutely. It is fanaticism, it is terror, and some other horrible things. So just take into account such a picture of Islam nowadays, it is a real fact, not only in the Western countries. In Russia, we have the same picture. The differences are not important just now. And so in this very time, it is very important to show the in-depth, the intellectual heritage of Islam, which is not the ownership of Muslim society. It is the ownership of the human mankind. When I teach Islamic law, I say, as the Roman law is not the property of the Rome, it is the property of the whole world. Islamic law, it is also not the property of Muslim society or Muslims. No, it is a property, it is a heritage of the whole world. And the book of Wael Hallaq, of course, contributes in presenting Islam in that way. I believe that this book will be very useful for Russian scientists and students and scholars. First of all, for Orientalists, maybe philosophers, maybe the specialists in some other human sciences, and also for jurists. I was impressed by some observations in Russian translation of Wael books concerning the relationships between usul al-fiqh and the modern legislation. He mentioned the legislation of in personal status of Tunis, as far as I remember, as also some Sudanese examples. Take, for example, concerning the talfiq and some other things. It is very important for the legal analysis of the modern Islamic legislations in use in some Muslim countries. I am a lawyer, and my approach to the Islamic law is a little more is some maybe different from a Wael view, because I agree with everything I found in his book, but I try to think what are the role played by usul al-fiqh for law in proper sense. For law is the system of obligatory legal norms adopted by state and guaranteed by state mechanism, for example, as courts. But I believe that Wael's books is very useful for understanding, even for Islamic law in legal sense, in legal understanding for jurists, for legal faculty. And so it will be useful not only for the School of Oriental Studies, but for the law faculty of the High School of Economics. And I believe that in future there will be opportunity to meet Wael Hallaq in Moscow. We invite you. You are not in the list of the persons who are have no right to go to Russia. Yes, absolutely, absolutely, yes. So I believe that there will be an opportunity to meet with you in Moscow. Moscow is a good place. It's a very and will be. I believe that if you come to Moscow, we'll be happy to meet not only with your colleagues in Moscow, but to be acquainted with our capital.
Thank you. It will be my pleasure to do so and to see you again. Once I saw your face on the screen, I immediately, like you, remembered that indeed we have met before, and we had some interesting conversations. So it would be a pleasure for me to visit.
I do remember. I do remember that while. I do remember that while. Yeah.
Thank you so much for your remarks as well.
I have my lecture in 3-5 minutes, so I'll thank you very much. Bye-bye.
See you. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Professor Sukianin, and have a good evening. Thank you for joining us. And Professor Sukianin modestly kept silent, but he masters Arabic language. So this is the case when I regretted that our event is not held in Arabic language, but hopefully next time, maybe in Moscow. Okay, thank you so much. Dr. Alexeyev, the floor is yours if you have something to comment on the work which we have done on the series which were presented by Professor Hallaq. Please, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Irina. I, first of all, would like to welcome Professor Hallaq. Nice to meet you, and it was a great pleasure and an honor for me to edit the Russian translation of your book. And I completely agree with Professor Sukianin about the usefulness and perspectiveness of such works in general, and your this particular book in particular. We are extensively discussing with my students these problems and your ideas as well. And right now, I'm joining this Zoom conference also from the seminar with my students from the Russian State University for the Humanities. We are all lecturing people and not stopping to lecture and to hold seminars. So Professor Sukianin is going out for the lecture, and I'm already at the lecture and joining this conference in the company of my students who I'm sure have questions on not only on this particular book, your book, which just appeared, but on other books that they have read in English. And I personally recommend your works to study history of Islamic law and this Islamic politics. Now I'm holding a course on Islamic political and legal thought, and your works are completely relevant for me and for our students. So thank you very much. I just would like to comment on some of your statements during your talk now, especially on the last part of your talk when you were speaking about lack of usul al-fiqh in modern contemporary Muslim thought and Muslim discussions. And maybe I could problematize somehow this quite radical statement, because as far as I see, there are very active modern Muslim groups. Maybe they do not form majorities of Muslims, or even majority of Muslim thinkers, but so-called neo-modernists, those who developed the theories of Maqasid Sharia, so the goals of Islamic Sharia, Islamic law, and so on. Aren't they those who try to revive or to make a revival for usul al-fiqh in contemporary Islamic discourses and Islamic discussions? And as far as I see, even in our country, which is Russia, where I personally collaborate very close with Muslim organizations, official and not official. They have a very deep and active interest to these theoretical approaches. The problem, as I can interpret it, not in lack of interest to usul and to principles and to theory, but lack of knowledge about this usul, because really the standard education of contemporary Muslim faqih is education of furu', of final legal and ritualistic norms, which are a result of ijtihad, of juristic legal thinking, but not on the theory. And now, after we published your book in Russians, in Russian, for example, people from the Central Muslim Authority and Russia's religious administration of Muslims of Russian Federations asked me to make a course or seminar on these theoretical approaches to usul al-fiqh to their ulama who have graduated from Al-Azhar and other Islamic Sharia faculties and universities in the Middle East, Central Asia, even in Russia, but they didn't get basic theoretical educations. They know concrete regulation, they know particular norms, they can operate with them, but they are unable to make any kind of ijtihad because they don't know basic theoretical approaches. So I'm sure that interest is very high, but the problem problem is not the lack of the interest to theory, but the lack of knowledge about this theory. So thank you very much once again, and أهلا وسهلا وتشرفنا بوصولك.
Thank you very much. I actually am learning a lot from your observations about how things are. Thank you very much. You are very kind.
Thank you. We are ready to start the questions and answers session, and I encourage all the guests who are willing to comment on, to ask Professor Hallaq on his books or his theories to write in chat, or you may ask your questions in voice. In both cases, please introduce yourself first. And we already have a question from our colleague from the High School of Economics, Professor Dmitry Poldnikov, professor of the Faculty of Law, the same faculty at which Professor Sukianin works at. So his question is a reference towards Professor Sukianin's comment. He said that both Muslim and Roman law belong to the humankind. And Professor Poldnikov asks, are there any attempts to compare both great legal tradition? And is this comparison possible at all in Professor Hallaq's view?
Between Roman law and the Sharia?
Between Muslim law and Roman law, yes.
Yeah. Well, in principle, I think that you can compare and contrast any two legal systems as we do These are all human products. Societies produce them, and they represent different, sometimes very different, sometimes a little different from each other, ways of, different ways of living in the world. And so, for example, one can ask, always can ask, the question is, how does a legal system create a particular kind of subject, particular kind of human subject? And that question would allow us to compare and contrast any two legal systems. But the Roman and the Islamic legal systems are actually much more amenable to comparison, because they actually share quite a bit of features that will allow very complex forms of comparison. First, they are systems that in a sense grew from each other. This is one thing, a field of research that has not been explored yet. It takes basically a whole career of a number of scholars to go into the details of this new field, which is to think first that, of course, the Roman law came, at least formally speaking, came before the Sharia, and therefore one is inclined to say, well, we can discuss, one of the things we can discuss is how, as many Orientalists in Euro-America try to do, is how the Islamic law derived from Roman law, among other sources. In other words, to speak about the influences of Roman law but actually the story becomes much more complicated and much more interesting if we were to say, well, actually the Sharia and Roman law derive from earlier sources of the Near East, because we know that Roman law now is not really a Western phenomenon in the conventional meaning of Western. Roman law is pretty much the fruit and the product of activities that happened geographically between Iraq now, from the Euphrates and the Tigris to the eastern half of the Mediterranean. In other words, the area that is now the little lake, so to speak, quote unquote, little lake between Greece and Egypt, going back to the coast of Lebanon and Palestine and down to Iraq. This is the area, and this area was common to both. And so the interesting part would say is how come, for example, there are features in the Sharia that echo Roman law, that we have no way of proving that the Sharia borrowed directly from Roman law. This is the ultimate challenge, is that no one can prove with any reasonable certainty that the Sharia borrowed from the Roman law, but the similarity is there. And the only, really, I think the most viable solution is to study the two systems together and tracing common origins of both. In other words, the Sharia may have drawn on some Roman law elements, but also both of them derived from a third source that was prior to them both. And many people might find it surprising that these common sources might be quite Semitic in sometimes. So it's like a much more complicated story. And the Iraqi influence, the Babylonian influence on the Roman law and the Sharia has not been really done, researched properly. So yes, comparison, they are not just telling us about the nature of the legal systems, but actually they can dig far back into this history of legal systems to unravel common origins that enlighten our conception of what kind of humans elaborated what kind of a legal system and to what effect.
Thank you so much, Professor Hallaq. So we have also thanks to you in the chat, and the guests, thank you for the wonderful meeting and information. And I see that Denis Shadev has raised his hand. Denis, please, are you ready to ask Professor Hallaq by your voice? And please introduce yourself. Thank you.
Yes, I'm ready. Thank you for these wonderful lessons. My name is Denis Shadev, and I'm a researcher in sphere of Islamic law, Islamic practice, and especially my topic is about mosque and their connection with producing of normativity in modern Russia. And first of all, I would like to say thank you. When I was a student, I followed your book, Professor Hallaq, and I really thank you for all of your ideas. And now I suggest it for my friends, my students, and other colleagues. And thank you a lot. And if I may, I would like to ask one question with half. First, my question is, could you please share your ideas about modern tendency, modern trends in development of Sharia interpretation? In my research, I focus on one small special trend like bureaucratization of Islamic interpretation, but it's very interesting for me, and I think it would be very useful for all our audience to hear your ideas about this topic. And half of my other question is, what is your new? What about is your new maybe research, your development of your ideas, and what are you working currently? Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you. Wonderful questions, and I'm so happy to know that you find my work useful for your students. Okay, well, your first question is a big one, actually. We can talk about it, and we did talk about it a little bit today. We talk about it for hours, and we will never even begin scratching the surface. But I would say that we are reaching a point in modernity, which we call now late modernity, that almost no one can miss the crisis that we are facing. We are facing not only crisis of these physical crises of destruction of nature, etc., which we all know about. This actually is something that, of course, disturbs me deeply. But I don't dwell on the physical aspect of it. What I would immediately go for is always to try to understand the epistemological dimensions of such destructions. And so we are actually destroying everything around us, including ourselves, because at the end of the day, we are part of nature, and we have always, when we changed our concept of nature in the 17th, 18th century, I mean, we in the Western here hemisphere, as Irina asked about what do you mean by we, I'm such a hybrid that I can use we in multiple ways. I could use we speaking about our Western world, because I live in the West and I work in the West and think quite often within the West. And at the same time, we can be the Middle Easterners or Arabs or Muslims or Asians or even Asians, Africans. So I'm kind of, so in this case, we have managed to create, to be honest with you, a big mess. And it is a time, and I'm not talking about even just the way we are transforming the world into a political, ugly political entity, both in terms of ugly political machinery, but also ugly political subjectivity, as we can see all over the world. We are basically destroying the fabric of the community, of society, of the family, and therefore we have, as scholars, a moral and ethical duty not to simply engage in scholarship only for the purpose of just promoting our careers and making a salary. And there's nothing wrong with that. A salary, we need to live. We need to be able to make money. that is granted. But once we secure the basic requirements of life, I think it is the ethical obligation of a scholar, and no scholar should really miss on this opportunity, in my opinion. Otherwise, it would be utterly shameful, is to engage in contributing to this, a solution to this. So how do I think about, for example, my field, as I have been doing for the past 15 years? As somebody comes from Islamic studies, I know about Islam a whole lot, but what do I do with this? Is it going to stay within the Orientalist paradigm of studying Islam as the other, as the obscure, distant others, where, you know, it's like we study Islam, but it is just about that. It's not relevant to anything else. Now, I refuse to take this. My basic method is that there is nothing in the world that we study that cannot be made relevant to everything else in the world. The world is interconnected, and if we are still discussing ideas of usul al-fiqh today, it means something. It means that there must be something in this residue of a heritage that is forcing us to recalibrate and rethink certain things that happened in the past that are still relevant today. No one can revive the past. The past is dead. When we say a legal system perishes out of existence, I'm not sure how you can bring it back without creating everything around it and the society that produced it, which is an impossibility. So in many ways, the past is dead, but in many other ways that are very important, the past is not. Actually, it may be contrary to the mythical concept of the theory and the doctrine and theology of progress. It may be actually our only resource for inspiration and knowledge, because we are literally messing up the present, and we don't know anything about the future. So what are we left with? We have a very poor standing today as human subjects. We literally should be ashamed of ourselves for what we are doing, all of us, everywhere. And at the same time, we cannot look at the future and say, okay, the future will teach us something, because the future does not have anything for us. We will hopefully live it, but we need, in fact, we are going to an empty space with something that is with us. We carry it to the future. The future is made by us, no one else. And so what do we bring to the future? We bring our knowledge of everything of the past. So the past is a great, I call it a great heuristic, a great way of learning about so many things. It doesn't mean that we replicate it, of course, but we mean as Abdurrahman Taha would say, ethical time is perennial. Ethical time cannot be limited to 600 to 1000 AD, or between the 14th and the 16th centuries, or anything. Ethical time is a time of humanity. This is always relevant. All we need to do is to try to bank on it, to take it seriously, which is, of course, in modernity, we are so to think, I'm just saying, giving you like a general answer, because the details will take us forever. To begin to think about the place of usul fiqh and the Sharia in modernity should not be limited to a constrained and very technical and legal arena. This is what most people are doing, and I think it is important work, but it is not sufficient. We need to think of these and many others, including Sufism and other important contributions of Islam, in terms of what can we bring from these to modernity as a critique, as something that can instruct us, something that can teach us about how other people lived and conceived the world, because we really need a lot of instruction. We think ourselves to be really the masters of the universe and we know everything. Actually, we are entering an age of ignorance again. We are in a jahiliyyah, to be honest with you. The fact that we are destroying everything around us, there must be something terribly wrong with us. And so we need lots of instruction and learning. And I think we can begin with all of these disciplines, and all the, even adab is even more magnificent way of introducing critique to modernity. But that's another subject. It is not my field, but I have a great admiration for it and for Sufism as well. As for my work now, I'm working on one large project now. Nothing more, but it's a huge project. I don't know I don't know how long it will take to accomplish, but it is about writing the constitutional history of Islam until the 19th century. How, in other words, to ask the question, how did Muslims govern themselves politically? And of course, when I say politically, I mean many things here in this case. How did they govern themselves between the four-era formation of Islam, let's say the 2nd, 3rd century of the Hijrah, to put it in the Gregorian calendar, between, let's say, the 8th, 9th centuries until the 18th, 19th. This is the thing, and it's like a huge project which may involve writing the history of, let's say, the Mamluk Empire, literally as a more or less as a complete, well, fleshed out history, as detailed history, to illustrate, for example, the case of the Mamluks being the most, in a sense, the most radical, one of the most radical manifestations of governance in Islam, as a high point, and another, not high point of actually of constitutional disarray, and other cases where it is the constitutionalism was operating in a full sense. So it's a complex work which I hope I can bring to fruition and publish, because it might take many years. Thank you for your questions.
Thank you so much, Denise. Thank you, Professor Hallaq, for your comment, and we wish you to publish this book soon. I think that I suggest that it will be connected to one of your previous books, or Impossible State. So it's will be like a continuation.
Yes, of the project. Yes.
Yes. Thank you. Wish you all the best in this work. And we also have a question from Karim. Gainullah Karim, you are welcome to turn on your camera and to ask your question in voice, please. And please introduce yourself to the speaker.
My name is Karim Gainulin. I'm a student of Igor Alexeyev, and also I was a student of Irina Tsarigarotsova, and on the Russian University of Humanities, and I'm very glad, and it's an honor for me to meet you and to listen your statement, because it was very interesting, and I also want to say thank you for the translation of your work to Russian language. Thank you very much. And I want to ask you not about just criticism of modernity through the perspective of Islam, but about the...
I think it's a poor connection on the street. Since we are disconnected, since Karim is disconnected, so if I may, I also have a question to you. And the question is following, you are lecturing on the topics on which you write, and you have many, I suggest that you have many students from Muslim peoples, and your books are translated into the languages of the Middle East. Do you trace the reaction of the Muslim peoples to your ideas, to your books, and what are the most popular ways, or what are the most popular models of reaction of Muslims to your books, to your ideas?
Thank you, Irina. A very, very, very good and difficult question to answer. If you asked me this question 15 years ago, I would say, they are translating my work, and actually I'm fairly popular among the Muslim reader. But now the situation has gotten complicated after The Impossible State. The Impossible State, Ad-Dawla al-Mustahila, came out in Arabic less than 1 year after its publication in English, only a few months after, created a major upheaval in the intellectual scene of of the Arab world, and to some extent in the Muslim world as well. Even the Malaysians and the Indonesians and others reacted to it in all sorts of ways. But the book alienated part of my audience, because many people thought that I am saying certain things that in fact I was not saying. But the book was misread in many ways. I think some people got stuck on certain paragraphs and certain titles and certain headings, but they did not read the more elaborate ideas that I was deploying in the book, because it is a book that is more difficult to read than others. So it is not easily accessible to everyone, and so many people judged it basically, as they say, judge it by the cover. But in many ways also, I not only lost part of the audience in terms of sympathy, but also I suspect that there are some people who don't like what I write now about certain about these issues. But the majority, I think, does appreciate the work, and in fact, the evidence of it is that I would say that now almost everything I have written in my life has been translated into both Turkish and Arabic. So it is accessible in these two languages, almost everything I have written. And that is already an accomplishment in terms of my desire to penetrate the Muslim market, because when I write now, I actually don't think of in fact, gradually, I am in fact thinking of my own Western audience as being secondary. It's becoming less and less important to me. Yes, I write in English because I want to access the world, but the target of the issues that I raise, the way I deal with them, is now increasingly being directed not at the Western audience, because that audience is in some ways is so saturated that I have no hope of converting any or changing their mind about anything now. It is, I would say that it is, to some extent, it's a hopeless situation, especially in the United States. The situation is really stubbornly political, and to such an extent that some quite repugnant things you see about how people behave towards Muslims and others, much less their ideas and their history, etc. So the market is very bad now in terms of readership and academia even. But I would say that my work is worth doing in English because it gets translated into many Muslim languages, not to mention, of course, as your good self has done, to Russian, Japanese, Chinese, under work now. Korean translations are coming out, and of course the Indonesian and the Malaysian, whatever we have in almost in entirety of Asia is accessible now. So in that sense, yes. I think whether people agree or disagree with me, and I don't want people to agree with me, to be honest with you. I'm happy to see people reacting, and as long as it is fair and civil, I'm happy to see that people are engaging with my work. All you have to do is just type the titles of the books in Arabic and on Google, and you will see the amount of reaction that these books generate in terms of TV shows, in terms of reviews, reactions on social media, everywhere. So I would say that my investment in this, and when I say investment, it's just not just hard work, because as I always say, whenever every book you write, you develop a problem in one of your vertebrae in your spine. So it is not an easy thing to write a book, but I think this is worth every investment I have made.
Thank you so much. Thank you. There are more and more scholars in Russia who believe that and who say with a certain portion of confidence that Russian is also one of the languages of Islam. So in this regard, we are very interested in getting the reaction towards the Russian translation of your book. And I promise you to keep you updated on the reactions on comments on other types of reaction to this book. And we also have another question from Samir Kadyrov. Please, Samir, introduce yourself to the speaker.
Hi, Ms. Wael. I'm Kadyrov Samir. I am a student of Higher School of Economics, the Faculty of International Relationships. It's a great pleasure for us to listen to you and to have translated your book in Russian, and I of course will read it. Maybe my question is off topic, but how does the Islamic law reflect the women's position? Because the matter is quite politicized, and there are many prejudiced opinions towards this matter. How do you see it as an expert in this sphere? Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Samir. It's a very good and again complicated question. I would say that there are many challenges for us to study the issue of the question of women, gender, sexuality, and all of these interrelated issues in the history of Islam. Before we really so far we really don't know. When I read the scholarly writings on women and gender and such issues, I am always struck by the lack of depth, that historical depth that these studies have. And I think we haven't figured out yet what I call the internal logic of Muslim society in order to figure out how women lived in it to begin with. So if we don't know really well how women lived in these Muslim societies, we cannot really make a judgment about whether the Sharia goes right or left about a certain question. The other thing is that this is the problem in our understanding of the internal logic of the lives of women in as an important part of the social production and whatnot in Islam. The other part is that we have to also be critical in our choice of the methodology by which we study. Not in terms of just figuring out the historical context. The historical issue is an empirical issue. In other words, it's an issue of literally understanding all the facts that went into the making of the lives of Muslim women. And we don't know these yet, and we don't really understand them well, and people are too quick to judge, too quick to make these rash statements about the position of women in one place or another in the history of Islam. But the other problem we face, the other challenge we face, is a theoretical methodological challenge. Is that if you come from a certain feminist perspective from the West, studying, or you already determined the kind of research questions that you have. It's as if these research questions are metaphysically ordained, as somebody like God put them on earth as the objective questions that we have to deal with. How do you know that your question is, to begin with, is a legitimate question? Maybe the question itself is problematic before we direct it like a projectile on the Muslim history and Muslims. We need to check our own assumptions. We need to ask, for example, is our concept of feminism or concepts of feminism, are they themselves problematic? Are they themselves engulfed in modernist, perhaps even capitalist, liberal assumptions that are extremely problematic and that they cannot be the foundation of really a real inquiry, genuine inquiry about what women were anywhere in the world? So you have to agree with the general tenor of the feminist perspective on women in order to accept the scholarship as legitimate. I don't. I think that feminism is in the West, in particular, is the product of the last 200 years of history in the West, and therefore it is as much subject to critique as anything else in the world. In fact, it is probably, together with the larger phenomenon of modernity, I think that it needs to be first critiqued robustly, and then we decide what the kind of questions we are going to ask about other women, whether they were Amerindian, Mayan women or Muslim women.
Thank you. A related question, if I may, and what about Islamic feminism, which was represented by Zainab al-Ghazali? Is it a feminism, or is it like an alternative model of feminism rooted in Islam? So what is your...
No, I think there are. I was speaking only about the heavy weight of the common perception of feminism in the West, because there is something that drives it. Like everybody, I see it in my students. They come and they start asking these questions. Did you think about your questions? Maybe your questions are problematic. I'm talking about, but if we were to look into the Muslim world itself, of course, there are Zainab al-Ghazali and, for example, her sisters, so to speak, her intellectual sisters in Africa, such as the idea of African motherism and the concept of women's quote-unquote liberation within an African or Islamic context. That's another story altogether. There are serious sets of values that have been taken into consideration and incorporated in that kind of feminism. And I actually tend to sympathize with it much more. So, for example, African feminism of the sort I'm talking about it appeals to me, but I'm not sure I am readily happy to continue the discourse or accept as unexamined the discourse of Western feminism. I don't think it's so tied to capitalism that it already creates serious problems.
Mm-hmm. Thank you so much. Thank you. Another question from Dr. Iskander Saidbatalov, one of our colleagues from the Republic of Bashkortostan, located in Volga-Ural region. So he thanks you very much for your book and a deep lecture today. And his question is, you have mentioned the potential of Sufism to express complicated things with simple words. How do you think, did the language of Usul al-Fiqh affect the formation of the language of Sufism, if it did?
Thank you. A good question. Usul al-Fiqh cannot be accused of simple narratives. It doesn't mean that simple narratives are like in this story of the nafs, that when God created the nafs and punished it for 4,000 years in the sea of hunger. This is a simple story, very, like, it is stated usually in a few lines, and it's a beautiful story that captures, it's a beautiful aphorism that captures so much in Sufi philosophy. Usul al-Fiqh, they could not do this. Usul al-Fiqh always navigated at the very complex and high level. It is, in fact, it is a level that even the other Muslim scholars who were doing fiqh and other things sometimes could not penetrate. Like, for example, we know that Ibn Salah, who was a major muhaddith, etc., actually failed in Usul al-Fiqh classes he took with his master. And this is, they say that Ibn Salah became a muhaddith because he could not succeed in Usul al-Fiqh. And this is Ibn Salah, who was a major figure in hadith. But Usul al-Fiqh is no doubt very complicated, and there is nothing absolutely simple about it. So no, it could not access the general audience. I mean, when Juwayni wrote Al-Waraqat, which was presumably intended for like beginning students, about 7-8 pages summarizing all, and this little thing, Al-Waraqat, which is the simple little manual, became even more complicated than the big books, because people said, what does he mean by this? What does he mean by that? And so there are many commentaries on al-Waraqat. In terms of usul al-fiqh, of its influence I don't see that the Sufis I don't see them standing at the door of usul al-fiqh. They take usul al-fiqh to some extent for granted. If we are talking about the sober Sufis who were the majority, we're not talking about the intoxicated Sufis, but the sober Sufis who were really the majority of Sufis in the Muslim world, they all accepted the Sharia and the usul al-fiqh and the 4 sources of the law and took them for granted. In fact, they were the basic props on which they elaborated their systems of Sufism. In other words, they began there and went further up, so to speak, or down, however you want to do it. So what do they learn? How did usul fiqh affect Sufism? Only by making the dalil navigate at a higher spiritual level. So, for example, instead of the ta'lil for the illah and the causation and reasoning, etc., etc., the Sufis saw in that as lum'a, like lum'a, that actually the lum'a is that flame that sparks in order to give you light. In other words, to give you an understanding of the light of God, so to speak. So they made reasoning more abstract to such an extent that the illah becomes actually the source of the lum'a. When Sarraj called his book Kitab al-Lum'a, in many ways that's what he was referring to. So I would say there is of course a substantive connection between the two, but the Sufis again did not stand at usul al-fiqh and stayed there. They took it in a different direction.
Thank you so much, Professor Hallaq. I think there is no other questions. So again, thank you so much for that you have accepted our invitation. It is a great pleasure and honor for us, and we wish you good luck in your academic work, in your teaching, and hope I really join Professor Sukiyanin's invitation for you to come to Moscow, and really do hope that it happens one day. We also hope that in other books will be translated into Russian language, and we have already selected the Impossible State to translate in the next term, and we hope that this work will be done in several years, inshallah. So thank you so much again, and good evening.
Thank you, and thank you for the invitation. Thank you for allowing me to join you today. This is quite an experience for me, and I found it extremely delightful. And talking to you and to my good colleagues, meeting old colleagues and making new friends. And I am of course humbled and grateful that you are thinking of translating a second book into Russian. And of course, it would be a great pleasure to one day to come and meet you all in person and to have intense and robust conversations one-to-one. I hope so. Yes, and thank you very much for everything again.
Thank you so much, Professor.
Bye-bye, everyone. Yes, bye-bye. Bye-bye.
Goodbye.